Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to do a roll call here. So Greta, could you do the roll call to the advisory committee?
I can, sure. We have Chair Davis,
Here.
Vice Chair Saxon,
Here.
Member Becker,
Here.
Member Black,
Here.
Member Blackerby,
Here.
Member Bonderson. We'll skip Member Bonderson.
Yeah, she's here.
Great, thank you. Member Caparelli. Member Durling.
Here.
Here.
Thank you. Member Caparelli. Thank you.
Here.
Member Ehrman. I know she was.
You're muted, Nadja. Yeah, she's here.
Member Elander.
Here.
Member Gutierrez. Not present at the moment. Member Harmon.
Here.
Thank you. Member Jordan.
Here.
Member Lenvik. Member Lewis.
Here.
Member Miller.
Here.
Member Tejada.
Here.
Thank you. Just a friendly reminder, if you would make sure to mute yourselves when you're not speaking, that would be great. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you for that. Opening remarks and announcements. My opening remark is I can officially declare that the Santa Barbara summer is officially over. It's happening as we speak. It was a wonderful weekend. I hope everybody got out. I saw a few of you at the beach over the weekend, so boy, incredible weather. Are there any announcements by anyone here? Greta, are there any announcements from staff? Tess, Eli?
Chair Davis, I have a couple announcements.
Go
So
ahead.
just as for information, we will be conducting an update on the State Street Advisory Committee and the State Street Master Planning process tomorrow at City Council. It's item number 16. So the meeting begins at 2 p.m. And if you're interested in attending and listening in or providing comment, you're of course more than welcome to join me. And then the resources page has been updated with a few different links, and then also the programs from the City of San Diego and City of San Francisco that have recently been enacted, transitioning from an emergency to a more permanent parklet type infrastructure in those cities, just in case you're interested. And then just as a reminder, there are 3 walking tours that are set up with Mr. Grumbine, the first of which will begin on Thursday. So I'll see some of you on Thursday at 11 o'clock, and then the rest of you I'll see in December. If you haven't signed up but are interested in joining, just send me an email and we can get you signed up. And then also, I wanted to just introduce Matt Four, who we have with us here today. So Matt is has taken a new role as the interim downtown cross-functional team manager in Public Works. So want to welcome him. He'll be really instrumental in this process as well. And then we also have Jason Harris, the Economic Development Manager, and Dan Henschke, the Assistant City Attorney, with us today. And they'll join us when we talk about the replacement to the ordinance, agenda item 2B. And that is it from me for the moment.
Great. Good, thank you very much. Any announcements from any committee members? Not seeing any. Let's move on then to the agenda review. Usually I kind of go over the top of the agenda, but Tessa's staff report was so complete. This is going to be really brief, okay? Really great opening staff report here, Tess. I just want to compliment you on the quality and the components that you put in there. Makes my job very easy as chair. Ken's going to lead us in adopting and hopefully adopting the committee's operating principles and commitments. We'll have, as Tess mentioned, a briefing on the replacement of the Emergency Economic Recovery Ordinance. At that point, I'm going to ask the council peoples to weigh in, the 3 council members we have to weigh in as to what their thoughts are relative to that ordinance, and if now or in the future, a role of the SSAAC might be relative to the interim actions that they're going to be looking at going forward. Then the most important item on our agenda, Tess has included the draft RFP for the State Street Master Plan. In gathering our comments here today in order to allow staff to complete that and get it out right after the holidays at the beginning of January is a key target, which I really want to keep us focused on making sure that happens. Lastly, we'll talk about upcoming agendas. Staff has a concept relative to a number of study items going forward, and then while we're waiting for the master plan process to begin in the late spring. And we also want to talk about possibly canceling the December meeting and scheduling an earlier meeting in January, given the nature of the 20th being at that Christmas week there. Many of us are going to be out of town. So with that, I'm going to ask Greta, is there any general public comment at the present time before we go into the agenda items?
Thank you.
Chair
Just a
Davis?
reminder,
Sorry, Greta, just to interrupt. Just so I think we want to make sure to get the approval of the October 18th minutes as well.
Yeah, I'll come back to that. Thank you.
Okay.
if there's any member of the public, thank you. If there's any member of the public who wishes to make a comment, please click the hand icon in your control panel. I'll call on you and you'll have 2 minutes to speak. And no one has raised their hand. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Tess, for catching that. Let's go back to item C. This is the approval of the minutes from the October 18th, 2021 meeting. Do I have a motion?
I can move to approve the minutes of the October.
Roxanne? Roxana made the motion. Is there a second?
Second, Roger.
Okay, Roger made the second. Greta, you want to do a roll call on that real quickly?
We have member Black,
Aye.
member Blackerby,
Aye.
member Bonderson,
Yes.
member Durling,
Yes.
member Ehrman,
Yes.
member Elander,
Yes.
member Gutierrez,
Yes.
member Harmon,
Yes.
member Jordan,
Yes.
member Lundvik is not present. Member Lewis,
Yes.
member Miller,
Yes.
member Tejada,
Aye.
Chair Davis,
Aye.
Vice Chair Saxon.
Yes.
Minutes are approved. Thank you very much. And Roger, thank you for keeping me grounded. I'm glad you're here. Takes us to our first agenda item, item A, that is the SSAC, State Street Advisory Committee, Operating Principles and Commitments. Ken, it's all yours from here.
Great. Thank you, Dave. And hi, everyone. You all know, I think that over the past month, I've had the good pleasure of meeting with just about every one of you one-on-one. I want to officially say that that's more fun than GoToMeeting. It was really a wonderful experience to get to know you each individually, to hear your perspectives, and for most of us also, I had the chance to see State Street through your eyes, which was wonderful for me, a wonderful learning opportunity. I want to congratulate the City Council on having done a great job in selecting this group of people. It's quite an experienced and visionary and diverse group. And so one thing I want to encourage each of you is, as much as you can, I want to encourage you to take time to connect with your fellow committee members. I'm really glad that we're going to be getting out on State Street. And I want to thank Tess for setting up that opportunity with Anthony Grumbine. I think that's going to be really interesting and a lot of fun. And we'll be in small groups where you can begin to connect with one another in person. What I'm bringing to you today is a proposal for a set of operating principles for our committee and its process that ultimately will lead to this long-term master plan for downtown. The content in this came from my conversations with each of you. I asked you each about your perspectives on a number of things, but including our committee and how it was going to function together. I took my notes from our meetings and I organized them into a proposal, which is a set of operating principles for our committee as a whole, as well as for us as individual committee members. So I know, having spoken to you, that each of you has served on many boards and committees. And I know that coming to common agreement about how we operate is a critical early step. Individually, we each bring specific experiences and perspectives, but none of us has the whole picture. As we agree on a set of principles to guide our work, we begin to weave ourselves into a cohesive group. So in the committee packet that you received last week, I included a few-page memo outlining a proposed set of operating principles that in this slide, you see the headlines of that. And I also included a description about what was meant by each one. So my hope today is that we can discuss this list and hear from many of you about what particularly resonates with you on the list. And I also invite you to lift up if there's anything you want particular clarification on, or if there's something that you might disagree with, or if there's something that you think is missing. My hope is that at the end of this discussion, we'll feel ready to adopt a set of operating principles for the State Street Advisory Committee to guide us in our work as we move towards generating a long-term master plan for downtown Santa Barbara. So with that, I'll turn it back to the chair.
Ken, thank you. Thank you for everything. One, for meeting with everybody and taking their input and organizing us so we can have a good discussion. Let the record show that Mr. Lenvik has joined us, so he should be here someplace soon in that regard. And Ken said, we're really open to listening. We really want to have a conversation. And Ken asked me to remind you, we'd like to keep this as personal as possible. So we don't need to talk about committee member Davis or Chair Davis. You can call me Dave and I can call you Roger, right? We can actually have a conversation. So let's just talk about what Ken has put together here, which I think is fabulous. And so I'm opening it up for conversation. Anyone?
I
Robin, go
guess
ahead.
oh, sorry.
Robin?
Thank you. I think this is a really quality thought process that you've put together here, Ken. I think it's well thought out. It is very inclusive of a lot of thoughts of things that need to be thought about. And one of the key things that I think is important here is just how much each of us will need to take time to learn, as well as be supportive of one another and all of the diverse users of downtown. There's significant amounts of different business types. There's significant amounts of different ways that the space is used throughout a year. And so learning about all of those different things, and sometimes one perspective is louder than another perspective, but that doesn't mean that another perspective isn't necessary to be at the table. And so we need to also think about who are not contributing to, whether it's public comment or whoever. So we got to make sure that those voices are part of the conversation so that we really have a very quality end product. So, but I really like where you're going with this, Ken, and I fully support it.
Great. Someone else? Nadra.
Thank you, Dave. Well, first off, I want to thank you too, Ken, for taking the time to make this a priority for our group, our committee, and reaching out to everyone and meeting with everyone and really pulling together a cohesive list for us. I completely agree with Robin. I think that all of these really reflect the different points of view of everyone that is in the committee. And one thing that really stood out to me, and I think we might have even had some conversations around the idea of healthy conflict and just understanding that we come from so many different backgrounds. Everyone's going to have so many different points of view, and that's okay, and to embrace that. And I would even think maybe one step further in terms of a collaborative spirit. I don't know if that is too much to add or if that healthy conflict is encompassed in that, but just to think about everything that we're doing as, in conjunction with each other, and to look at that, our unit as we're integrated with each other, our thoughts and our ideas, and even if they're not the same, they all have a place in that collaborative spirit. So, and thank you again for doing this.
Someone else, good comments, Nadra, thank you. Other comments? Nobody's,
Okay.
Diane.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I have a dog that's now bothering me. So what I took from this, I thought it was a really good set of principles, and I think it will serve us well if we all, strive to go by them. The two that I thought worked well together were healthy conflict, and then the for each committee member, open your perspective and learn. Because I think we're all coming into this with some ideas about what we think should happen. And I certainly am. And it's a good reminder that we don't know everything and we don't know everybody's perspective. And it's really important to listen and take in information before we really harden in our positions. So I thought that was a really good reminder. And I too really appreciated meeting with Ken and walking State Street with him, and look forward to meeting others in person as well.
Yeah, every time we'd come back to the chairs meeting with the staff, Ken had met with more of you. He'd come back all energized, talking about, my God, I never saw State Street like that before. So you guys really inputting into Ken's education as to what we're all about. And boy, he brought it for us in that regard. Other comments? Okay, I actually have one. I really like the fact that the committee basically, the impact that came back to Ken was that this committee was future oriented, looking at the big picture. The city's had another committee. Megan was the chair that basically looked at a lot of the details of the interim. You have all these committees from HLC, ABR, Arts Advisory that are down into the deeds. We're unique. We're unique because we've been asked to really basically lead the community through a future visiting process. And I like the fact that led our principles in that regard. So Ken, I'm glad that came out of your discussions, because that's how I feel very strongly. That's our forte. That's where we've been asked to look at the future in that regard. So thank you for that. I'll tell you, I love all the comments, but I'm going to ask for a motion to approve these, to adopt these. I'm sorry. Is there a motion to adopt these principles?
Dave?
Can I just quickly ask him? I would like to suggest that we add Nadra's suggestion about a collaborative spirit to the list of principles for our committee as a whole. I think it's a really nice addition.
Absolutely.
Ken, just to clarify, do we want to basically have it say healthy conflict and collaborative spirit, or do you want to have a separate item for collaborative spirit?
I think my suggestion would be to create a separate one.
Okay, great.
I like that. I like that.
And then,
before go ahead, I'm sorry.
Before we take a motion on this, if we could just pause for public comment, and then we can go ahead and take a motion.
That's exactly where I was going. Thank you. Greta, go ahead.
If there are any members of the public who would wish to make public comment at this time, please click the hand icon in your control panel. You'll have 2 minutes to speak. And no one has raised their hand.
I should have invited all my group facilitator friends. They would love this topic.
There we go. Okay, so we're looking for a motion to adopt with the inclusion of the collaborative process. Go ahead, Diane.
Yep, Dave, I'll move that we adopt with the inclusion of the collaborative spirit process.
I'll
Great,
second.
Diane. Who seconded? I'm sorry. I missed that. Kristen.
Hillary and I are
vying for it, so.
Kristen seconded it. Okay, Greta, let's do a roll call, please.
Member Black,
Aye.
Member Blackerby,
Aye.
Member Bonderson,
Yes.
Member Durling, Member Erman,
Aye.
Member Elander,
Yes.
Member Gutierrez,
Yes.
Member Harmon,
Yes.
Member Jordan,
Yes.
Member Lundvik,
Yes.
Member Lewis,
Yes.
Member Miller,
Yes.
Member Tejada,
Yes.
Chair Davis,
Yes,
Vice Chair Saxon.
Yes.
good job, Ken. Good job, committee. Way to go, guys. Actually, I think it's one of our first real motions. That takes us on to the next item. B, the interim operations and management process. Staff's going to provide a presentation regarding the replacement of the emergency economic recovery ordinance. Tess, you want to introduce this or what's?
Great, yes,
who's on-
thanks so
who's
much.
on first? Okay,
So I'm going to introduce this item. So we're going to discuss the draft proposed economic recovery extension and transition ordinance. But before we do that, I want to make sure that we're all aware of what exists today and how we got to where we are today. So we're just going to take a moment on that. And so if I could have Jason join us to provide a little bit of background, he's going to start us off. Great, thanks, Jason.
Great. Thank you. Good afternoon. Good to see everyone. So I'm just going to take us back to the beginning of the pandemic, give a quick overview of the Emergency Economic Recovery Ordinance, because that was really the basis of what the rest of the presentation and really the extension transition ordinance is really built upon. So if you all recall, early 2020, stay-at-home orders went into effect. Only essential businesses could operate. Pharmacies, grocery stores, restaurants were able to operate, but only at takeout and delivery. Many of those businesses couldn't sustain operations under that type of operating condition. So the city was really in a dire straits economically. Our substantive revenue streams were shut off. Businesses were in dire need for some level of lifesavers. This was before any federal or state financial programs started to be developed and distributed. The city of Santa Barbara was one of the first communities in California that invoked an emergency order to allow businesses to operate outdoors. That went into effect the Friday for Memorial Day weekend. It was followed with an emergency economic recovery ordinance that codified the ability for the street to close streets and to allow businesses to operate outdoors. Those are the simple provisions that went into effect. The output of that was the creation of parklets, really extensions of sidewalks into an on-street parking space. That happens citywide. In the case of State Street, we closed the street. Businesses were able to expand out onto the street in what we call business enclosure areas. Some did it at grade, as illustrated here. Others built structures. We issued a series of design guidelines to direct those improvements. Again, this was allowed without permits, without any formal approval process. We really wanted to be as extremely responsive as we could to allow businesses to operate. And immediately, the closure of State Street, followed by the creation of these outdoor business areas, had really dramatic, successful, positive impacts to downtown and to State Street, to the point that we still see the level of activity sustained as we've allowed for these activities. And this is, we're speaking obviously and focused on State Street, but these emergency economic ordinance allowed for other streets to be closed. West Victoria, the 0 block between Chapala and State Street, was initially closed for almost over a year fully. We reopened it eastbound, here in the past few months. And then we've made modifications to other streets, the 400 block of State Street, the 1300 block of State Street, and then a couple of other sections of roadways in the cities to allow for this activity. Next slide, please. And again, as you all recall, reflecting back, temporary, emergency. We put up these closures with just our traditional road construction equipment. As you can see, we had a series of date palms that had been donated. They were still in their landscape crates. And that condition was in place for, unfortunately, longer than we wanted. Working with the State Street Subcommittee of 3 council members, they supported the expenditure of $250,000 to put in the landscape planners, the traffic control devices, those center line, green roadway bike path delineators to kind of organize some of the bike path that did have positive impacts, both the aesthetic of creating those closures, but also the organization of cyclists through the State Street Promenade area. Next slide, please. And then again, just highlights these. We've also been evolving the management of the space. So I've referenced guidelines. We've issued guidelines for these outdoor business areas. There's one for parklets, as I referenced, that's citywide, expansion of the sidewalk into an on-street parking space. There's a guideline for businesses operating on State Street, a very specific condition. We don't really have any other space in the city in that realm. And then we have guidelines for outdoor business areas on private property. This ability for business to operate outdoors extends to private property as well. It has been a lifeline. Council's extended, as I've referenced several times, as the pandemic has ebbed and flowed with changes. We're still under a public health mandate for indoor masks. We're still monitoring COVID counts. We're still seeing business recover, to the point that staff is in the process of evaluating and developing the parameters of what a transition out of an emergency economic recovery ordinance looks like. We still feel and will be recommending to council that there's a need for businesses to operate outdoors, generally under these same provisions that I've been speaking of, for an additional amount of time for continued business recovery. We have made adjustments to these activities going forward. We've restricted the 500 block, where we have the greatest density of outdoor business area, to only pedestrian areas, and really looking for cyclists to dismount and walk through in that regard. And then this past June brought forth a series of modifications to these outdoor business areas, of which council directed for businesses operating on the sidewalks to transition into our sidewalk dining license program. So you can have outdoor dining on sidewalks, but they are through a formalized licensed permit program. The intent there is to really retain 8 feet minimum of downtown State Street sidewalks available for pedestrians. We were seeing a lot of congestion with sidewalk dining and pedestrians on the sidewalks. So we really wanted to clean that condition up. And then, as just the overall impetus of this is that it was temporary. It was all conditioned upon removal. There was no vested rights. These are not long-term permanent entitlements being vested. And even in the, this upcoming transition extension ordinance, the same principles would apply. These would be temporary continued measures. Again, no vested rights, but again, the city's willingness to support businesses to continue to operate outdoors safely and to support continued recovery. And so I think that might be the end of my slides. And if there's any questions, again, just an overview of the closure area here. I think you all are familiar with that boundary area that we've established initially, and that I think the intent for the foreseeable future is to retain this area in this kind of closed area. Promenade has been again, temporary moniker, by no means any formal branding of that district area. One interesting fact on this is kind of a cut and paste out of our downtown parking map. You can see the P's are the public restrooms with the 2 bodies in white and the white. I think that came up in one meeting about the amount of public restrooms in the downtown. So just interesting factoid there. So with that, next slide.
Great, thanks so much, Jason.
All right, thank you.
And just, so the red is highlighting the, where the promenade closure is, and then the blue outline is highlighting what the State Street Master Plan boundaries are. So just as a refresher, SOLA to the freeway underpass, and then across Chapalade and Acapa. So we're now going to transition from what exists today to what's being proposed to replace the ordinance that's going to expire on March 8th of 2022. And we're calling it the Economic Recovery Extension and Transition Ordinance. So I'm going to go ahead and talk through the ordinance a little bit. We have Dan Henschke on the line as well, so he can help with questions, and Jason can help also with some questions if you have any, and then we can go into discussion. And so just to start off, this ordinance right now is set to go to council at the end of January, likely the meeting of January 25th. So just kind of as a heads up on that, as a just framework, some of the items that are being proposed in this draft ordinance for the State Street Promenade are to continue the road closure between Haley and Victoria, continue to allow outdoor business areas, and then to prohibit signs on sidewalks so that sidewalks can remain open and accessible to all. That's not necessarily something that's new, it's just clarified further in this ordinance. So the replacement ordinance also allows parklets and the temporary expansion of commercial spaces outside of the State Street Promenade area to continue for the ordinance duration in on-street parking spaces, off-street parking areas, and then in other areas citywide. The ordinance keeps the same timing that's allowed in the emergency ordinance. So that includes operating hours in areas in the downtown core from 7 a.m. to 12:30 a.m. And then other areas have operating hours from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. That's the hours that are allowed with the in the public right of way, essentially. What hours you can have outdoor dining, for example, on the promenade or elsewhere in the city.
Jesus Christ.
And that's the same timing that we have currently in place under the emergency. And then the proposal again is a draft, but there is a current expiration date proposed for December 31st of 2023. And just to quickly mention that this is a transition ordinance from an emergency period when rules have been suspended to a longer recovery transition period where we're going to need to start to comply with code requirements. This ordinance is still enabling the closure to continue and the ability for businesses to continue to expand in public areas. And then just to think about it, this is really the overarching framework or the overarching ordinance. And from that, we can identify potential changes and look at various opportunities or considerations that we'll need to address during this interim phase between now and the completion of the master plan. And there are various things that staff's really thinking about in that regard. And at this point, I'm going to actually turn it over to Matt. Matt, if you want to jump on, if you have any other comments for the ordinance, feel free to make them.
Yeah, thank you, Tess. Well, as Tess said, one of the view of this is it's still allowing for all of these uses in the ways that are prescribed in the emergency ordinance. One of the things that we are looking at is in relation to these outdoor business activity areas, transitioning, as we transition from emergency to recovery, what does it look like to go from an enforcement sort of complaint-driven posture to something that's more a management and administrative regime. And so that's one of the things that we're looking at with this ordinance. It's something that we'll probably bring up to the city council of, looking at these roughly 140 outdoor business activity areas as well as parklets off of the promenade and asking council the question if it's your desire for us to to have our approach reflect something that's a little bit more permanent. So we're looking at some ideas of folding these into a process that businesses are more used to. So many of the businesses now are already used to something like the outdoor dining license agreements and that sort of approach. And so haven't worked out all the details yet, but I think it's something that would be a good idea to look at. It might be warranted at this point to allow us to take a more permanent look and give the businesses a more permanent idea of what of how these should be designed and how they should be operated. So we're not moving the goalposts, and so that there's surety on all sides, so that city staff know what we're looking at, businesses know what they're looking at, all the way until December of 2023. And I think that'll give everybody a lot more comfort. I think if that's council's desire, what we would probably recommend is that council refer us to the ordinance committee, not even having that regime worked out yet, but we could certainly bring a skeleton and say, here are some issues. Here, it's almost like a gap analysis. This emergency ordinance went into place. This is what we see as working for the city. This is what's working for the businesses. These are even some of the concerns from the businesses in the city that are shared. And we can look at putting together a management strategy and potentially using something like an existing outdoor dining license ordinance to achieve those goals. And so I think more to come on that, but we're trying to think a few steps ahead and again, give some clarity and surety to all the parties that are involved.
Thanks, Matt. Really appreciate you joining us. So that's sort of the overarching discussion for the replacement ordinance. Dave, did you want to chat at all about just kind of process and interim and questions at this point?
Yeah, first let's talk questions to staff. I want to come back to the council people and talk to them about what their thoughts are relative to how this committee basically approaches this particular item that's going to be on their agenda coming soon. But if there are any technical questions of staff at this point, let's do that first. Peter.
So one of my concerns is that we're starting this process with certain notions and relative to our principles about keeping our mind open and looking to the future. It concerns me that the 400 block continues to be kind of ignored and not addressed, and I just think we need to look to the future. If in fact we are going to close that block, now is a good time to experiment with that closure and get some guidance on future decisions. So I just wondering if staff has thought about that and thought it should be brought up.
It's a good question because Alejandra just brought that question up to me, and I know she's going to talk about that. And I'm hoping that council, when this comes before them, is going to ask staff to bring them back options on how to close the 400 block during this interim period to test those things out. Alejandra, go ahead.
Thank you. That is a question that actually one of my colleagues brought up, and I've heard a lot of concerns from the business owners there. And just driving around there, I mean, for me, it makes sense, but I understand that staff has certain concerns. But like Mr. Davis said, I think this is the time where we can really test it out and give very honest and transparent explanations of why would it work. So I'm definitely going to bring this up on, to task staff during council meeting, but that is a concern of mine. And I had a quick question on the hours of operation for other areas. It's at 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. What specific areas are we talking about?
Sure, yeah, good question. So the Central Business District, the Funk Zone, and then Jason, do you recall the third, or Dan, is it
Coast Village.
Coast Village? Thank you. Those three have operating hours from 7 a.m. to 12:30 a.m. And then the rest of the commercial areas within the city are limited from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m.
So the restaurants and bars that are outside the funk zone areas, they have to close at 10?
I believe those are included in
The outdoor expanded business areas is effectively considered outdoor dining. And if they're not in those commercial districts just referenced, yes, they could not have patrons in those expanded outdoor dining areas after 10 p.m.
Okay.
Unless they have, a conditional use permit or something of that nature that would grant them that right. But again, this was effectively maintain consistency to the outdoor dining program.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, Mike, you raised your hand, now I'll come to Diane.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. I just, real quick, I had a meeting with Public Works staff recently, and I know the city's in the process of updating its circulation element. And one of the tasks that they put on the consultant is to assess traffic patterns associated with changing the 400 block. So just highlighting that there is some work on the staff level on that.
Great, thanks. Diane.
So I had the same comment about the 400 block. One of the things I thought Tess asked us to think about is what things do we think should change in the interim or be addressed in the interim? And I've walked State Street a number of times, and the 400 block is the gateway coming from, under the freeway into the funk zone, and it is not very attractive. So it seems to me that something should happen there. And I think testing a closure of that block would be good. And then I had a question about how's the decision going to be made to test openings? Did you say that, Tess, that certain areas of State Street could be open during this interim period? And I was just not clear who or how that decision would be made.
Sure. So the closure would still be State Street from Victoria down to Haley. And then there are opportunities for, if the city administrator, in conjunction, I believe, with the traffic engineer, are wanting to test different approaches, that is an option. I believe that's the same, very similar language to what existed in the emergency ordinance, or somewhat similar. But Dan, I see you just popped on, so perhaps you could chime in here as well.
Sure. Actually, right now, in the emergency ordinance, there is no ability to test. It's all closed. And so what we did in the transition ordinance, recognizing that this is really a pilot program, if you will. And so what we did in the draft extension ordinance is give the city administrator the ability, with the approval of the traffic engineer, because all the traffic changes need to be approved by the traffic engineer in order to maintain our design immunity. And then in consultation with this committee, because the idea is, as you do your work and you're doing your tests of various theories for long-term planning at a macro level, you might need to do a micro test of that macro thinking, and we might want to close off or open up different areas of State Street so that you can see how it works. And so that is authorized in this ordinance.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead. Okay, go ahead. Now we'll come back to Roger.
I had a question in Mr. Ford's presentation, and thank you so much for that. That was very enlightening. I think I heard you use the word when transitioning, thinking about transitioning the parklets from this temporary emergency order to permanent. And I guess I wanted to ask about the use of the word permanent, given that we're involved in the creation of over the couple years of a long-term master plan, and to wondering if there's another interim stage potentially, or another versus the use of the word permanent.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Saxon. If I use the word permanent, I apologize. That was probably a bad word choice. It was recognizing the transition from emergency to, recovery or some transitional period. The point was we would like to better manage these. I think the business owners would like a more structured management program. And so we're looking to, to fold them into a process that everybody's already acquainted with in some cases.
Dave, you're
Sorry,
muted.
I was muted, sorry. Roger and then Ed.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on what Diane was talking about, the 400 block. I totally agree with the fact that that entryway to Santa Barbara is the forgotten stepchild, and it's also the tunnel, the 101. I forget. Yeah, tunnel. It's the underpass. As you all know, it's really scary for people to go through the ocean and get to the 400 block. So when we're in the future, when we're envisioning solutions and how to tackle, we need to think about what to do with that tunnel, make it more inviting, more exciting. And that is right now it feels so choppy. You have the funk zone and you have the wharf, and everything is so vibrant there. And then we have this sort of, Bermuda Triangle space there. And then you have the 500 block and things start. But I think I'm repeating myself. Late in the day, I don't become very articulate. But you guys understand what I'm trying to say. I think that fixing that connection and the 400 block is going to be something very important for us to discuss.
Great, thanks, Roger. Tess, add that to the list of the items to look at because of the council's projects, because they've done some work on the underpass, narrowing the street, expanding the sidewalks. So add that to the list. Let's see, I was at Ed and then to Roxana.
Thank you, Dave.
And then Robin.
I share others' concerns about the 400 block and what you see when you enter Santa Barbara from the beach, basically. It's one thing to come up there at in the evening on a weekend and it's vibrant and dynamic and the lights are twinkling and so on and so forth. But if you come up there at 9 o'clock on Wednesday morning or Friday morning or whatever, it looks like a disaster zone. And I think that we have ignored, that we potentially are ignoring the character of Santa Barbara and what Santa Barbara is known for, or has been known for 75, 100 years from the standpoint of its built environment. And it has been totally lost. I think if you were to look at what we have now and look back where we were 3 years ago, I think we have regressed significantly, and I'm real concerned about it. I'm also concerned about we end up coming out of this COVID-19 pandemic problem, and restaurants are able to open up their interiors again and get back to a kind of normal situation. Is it the intent of the city council to allow them to continue to have outside dining to the extent of 25, 35, in some cases, double their total interior dining with outside dining? I don't know that is the city's intention, but if we're looking down the road 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years before we get a permanent plan in there, we could see these outside parklets for a long, long time. And the restaurants have interior seating and exterior seating, and they don't have the required restroom capacity, and they don't, a whole series of things that I think that there's a real need to get some control back on how we are living on State Street. Get us back to where people come to Santa Barbara because of the quality of the Old Town area. And we can still have outside dining and parklets or whatever, like they have in a lot of cities in the US and Europe. But we can't, I don't believe we can continue to accept the kind of stuff we see strung up in the air right now. So I can talk about this for hours, but I know that that's not going to work. So I'll let someone else talk.
Great. Well, Roxana, you get to talk, and then I think I have Robin after that. Go ahead, Roxana.
Thank you so much. I wanted to piggyback on the comments that have been made about that 400 block as well. From another perspective, I just wanted to let you all know, as you may already know, the AIA spent a significant amount of time doing studies on the entire State Street, but also this block, both from an independent block to block study, and also as far as an exterior urban study of the street itself and how the street connects block by block. So just to be clear, some of the architects and volunteers from the public studied just the block itself, looking at all the buildings, the bulk size, massing, scale, and so on. And then in other groups, they looked at it as from a corridor perspective, how they connect on the street and the exterior spaces. I wanted to potentially ask if those drawings and those presentations can be provided to us as a group so that we can see some of those studies and what was done last year. Doesn't mean we have to adopt any of it, but just to see what they may have come up with and some of the background that they used to come up with their proposals. I think would be a very nice way for us to start envisioning what might work, might be available, and just have something on the table to think about. I suppose I should address this to Tess. Is it something that you could perhaps get from the AIA, or that you might like one of us to get from the AIA to provide as a link?
Roxana, are you referencing the design charrette and all of that work that occurred? Yeah, so that is a link on the resources page under the, if you go to the resources page, under the core items, it's the 4th link on that list. And then there's the 2017 AIA Santa Barbara design charrette as well under the additional section.
Yeah, let me suggest that I want to hear from the council people as the kind of input they want at this point on the emergency ordinance on that particular block. I think it's something which the council needs to ask for the options. When they get the options back, I think this committee should take a look at those and weigh in on them. And at that time, include the visioning that the AIA has put there. And again, it will obviously be part of our long-term strategy. So it's a really good comment. Well, we can get back there.
Thank you,
Robin,
Dave. I don't know when the best timing would be. I just wanted to sort of put that out on the table, that it's available and that it can be brought to us. I was also going to suggest for Tess, or for, however we want to handle this, if we could ask the AIA to specifically focus in on just the 400 block, as not to overwhelm us, so that we could.
Well, I guess the question is whether we're going to be looking at how you do interim 400 block, whether council wants to do it a different way after they've heard from staff as to what their options are. 400 block is totally dependent upon circulation, and you got to change the streets. That's the big thing. It's not a design issue as much as it is a circulation issue in order to open up the design possibilities. But I think council's got to answer that question. So I'm going to stop. Robin, go ahead real quickly, but then I want to go to the council people.
Dave, I just wanted to add one more thing about that, because you're spot on with that. That was a topic that I personally had taken to Rob Dayton back when he was with us at that time of the charrette. And he had shared with us a lot of different options that transportation could potentially offer in the event of a design. So I was also going to suggest, if it's appropriate, if it's something that we're interested in, we might be able to invite one of the traffic planners in to share that with us as a group as well.
So again, what I was commenting on, council needs to do that. Council needs to have the traffic planners report to them, and then they can refer that to us if they want our comments. But I think council, I'm gonna go to Mike Jordan and ask him a question on that particular matter, because we could be doing mini studies ourselves all over the place. Michael, what, in terms of basically where council's gonna be coming in March on this particular ordinance, pick it up from here. Where are we?
You want to talk about 400 Street, 400
Yeah.
block first?
Yeah.
Well, I'd like
Yeah.
to get Dan back on because he way too quickly glossed over the phrase of design immunity. And I think everybody needs to get a brief lesson on what design immunity means and why that's important. So can I get Mr. Henschke back on? Just, oh, there you are. Sorry, Dan. Could you just expand on that and why? I mean, I know kind of what the answer is. It adds X number of minutes to response times to certain parts of town, and that might be part of your answer too. So, but I think we all need to understand when you run up against the wall of design immunity, why it's important.
Well, without getting too technical and too difficult on this, a basic principle is that government is liable for injuries that are caused as a result of a dangerous condition of public property. One of the defenses to a dangerous condition lawsuit is that the design that is alleged to have created the dangerous condition was approved either by the decision-making body or by a delegated authority having professional expertise. And so the crucial factor there is that the design has to be reasonable and it has to be based upon sound principles. What we do, the reason that the 400 block has been so difficult is that traffic circulation and public safety, which depends on that traffic circulation, so far has not come up with a really good solution to closing off the 400 block in terms of getting people around, making a safe traffic pattern, and particularly allowing our police and more importantly, fire to have access to the other side of 101. And so the council has asked, and I think Mike Becker, you mentioned that traffic engineering staff is evaluating the various options for circulation patterns in that area to address whether or not it would be safe to close the 400 block to through traffic. And so any decision on the 400 block complete closure is going to need to depend upon the results of those studies. And that's not only to protect us from from a design immunity standpoint, but also to assure that our emergency first responders, police, fire, ambulance, have adequate access through that area.
Thanks. So I think, I know council's interested in it, but they're going to hear from people who are subject matter experts in design work and subject matter experts in liability protection. And so I'm hesitant personally to go too far down that rabbit hole without letting them do their work there. So I have a couple of questions too. Are we up to that yet?
Yeah, go for it.
So I don't want to hear from Dan on this. I'd really just like to hear from Tess, Jason, or Matt. I keep seeing references in the ordinance to the three documents. I think the guideline document, and doing business on State Street, and those are all in contradiction to what is out on State Street right now, and I'm uncertain what that means until 2023. Are we implementing new guidelines and forcing people who are there right now to change their interim temporary recovery facilities, or are we not?
Councilmember Jordan, I'll take the first crack at that question. I think what we had in mind was starting a few steps back to council and say, again, these are some things that we're seeing out there on the promenade that agree with the guidelines as they're written today. These are some things that we're seeing that don't. These are some of the complications that we have in terms of enforcement. And so if it's council's desire that we make some changes, that we transition from emergency to recovery, then refer us to the ordinance committee, for example, and we'll work with the ordinance committee through either a new ordinance or an existing one like the outdoor dining license agreement ordinance to make those changes. They're not going to be overnight. So for example, one option could be that the guidelines, either in substantial form or with some revisions, will go into effect sometime after the summer, say in September. And so everybody's got a lot of lead time that we're transitioning to something that will be more managed. I don't see us, it won't happen. We're not going to start with, March 9th, everything comes into immediate compliance. But I think this is a long enough term transition ordinance that that the businesses could transition into something that's more steady, that would include things like, as one of the committee members brought up, do we want to look at the width of a business, for example, and make sure that the outdoor business activity aligns with the width of the business? Do we want to have more surety on insurance that's provided, on ADA access, on accessibility and things like that? And so it's just a lot easier to handle those issues under a more steady management program than us, running around on a complaint-driven basis, for example. And so that's kind of the broader conversation we'd like to first pitch to council, and then if council wants us to go into greater detail on that, then refer us to a subcommittee and we'll work that through.
So Dave, I know you're always looking for input on work items, but I would encourage that to be a point of discussion for this group on recommendations to council on what should continue on State Street, either as part of those guidelines or not as part of those guidelines, and until when. I certainly have my own list, but technically the way I'm reading that ordinance, like if we just said, oh, okay, we like that way that ordinance reads, the moment that ordinance gets, that ordinance is not a transition ordinance, that ordinance is an end product ordinance. The moment that ordinance gets adopted, there are items on State Street that are in conflict with that ordinance, that are out of tune with that ordinance. There's not a transition paragraph in that ordinance there about grandfathering or a period of time to come into compliance. So, that's you were asking for 2 cents, I think, from council members. That's for tonight's business. That's the overriding point I see, is what do you see on State Street that should be addressed immediately? What should be addressed over a longer period of time, say by 2023, and then eventually you start on what the long term is. And if you just want my favorite poster child example, just so you know what I'm talking about personally, that's televisions hanging on the outside of a building at 15 feet in the 500 block. Okay, that's my example of something that immediately, to me, should not qualify for any one of those sets of guidelines any further. I can argue about 12 different shades of umbrellas or the color of wood or that kind of thing and how relaxed that should be. But there are things like my example, televisions on the side of buildings, that I think are an immediate issue to bring to council's attention.
Okay, let me get this straight. You want this committee to weigh in on a list of items they want council to consider looking at?
Well, so what I think's running through this committee today is to give us an opinion on that draft ordinance. And I'm reading that draft ordinance. From my experience with ordinances, is that draft ordinance is the law of the street as soon as it's adopted, and it is in conflict with 95 or 98% of what you see on State Street. And is that okay? That's my question.
Mike has his hand up. I want to go back to Matt or anybody else who wants to answer that question right now. Matt, you have a comment on that?
Well, Councilmember Jordan, we, as I said, our position on the guidelines has been one of enforcement, and enforcement is not an efficient way of, an enforcement only approach is not an efficient way of overseeing these. The numbers are also growing. So we're, in a very short period of time, we went from a small number of outdoor dining on the sidewalk, food facilities and businesses to, with this emergency ordinance, 70 of these outdoor business activities on the promenade and another 70 throughout the city in the form of parklets. So everything, in a good way, everything blossomed quickly, and that was the point of this, to get businesses back to working. But I think to the extent that the city council wants these activities to continue in the relative short term through December of 2023, or in the long term, that this approach of recognizing that we're transitioning from emergency to something else is warranted. But I'd love to have that conversation in front of council. Say, to the extent that you want us to regulate these differently or on a more managed basis, we'd love to do that. Either through simply adopting, not adopting, but enforcing and managing the businesses pursuant to the guidelines as written, or making some revisions to those and then republishing them.
I agree with that, but I think that's a valuable discussion to be had here also. Exactly what you just said in that last sentence.
Dave, this is Megan. I'm so sorry. I'm on my phone. I can't see if anyone is ahead of me, but I wanted to put my name in the queue to speak on this. Thank you.
Okay, actually, I have Robin, I have Mike, and then I have Megan. So Robin, go ahead. And then Hillary. Hillary? I'm sorry.
There's lots of things here to cover. Some of them have been discussed, but I'll bring up in kind of a second some of the things a couple of folks have said. The 400 block is a critical entryway to our downtown, and how it's managed and how it relates to the existing businesses and what they had going on there before. Is really important to think about, and also to think about what is possible in the near term as well as the far term. I understand the expense of readjusting the way the circulation works is significant, but it is a significant area that needs to be thought about in a significant way. They have been waiting, and their businesses have been suffering while we kind of contemplate what to do about that. Not that this particular group, but the city in general. A second element here is about the signage, the portable signage. Directional signage is really critical, especially because of the new way the State Street Promenade is being used, and how businesses on the side streets are not as visible as they had been in the past. And so thinking about how we can create new signage planning so that people can get off of State Street, because right now their eyes are kind of going forward, and those portable signs that are in this temporary ordinance are absolutely crucial to help businesses bring those eyes off of the street. And so thinking about if they can be placed actually in the street, and if we're going to be able to include that, or I understand right now, as it's written, it's not allowed on the sidewalk, but there are places on the sidewalk, whether it's close to a business or close to the curb and it's out of the way of traffic, that should be considered acceptable, because without having them, the businesses on the side streets significantly suffer. And I just want that point to be known, because I hear it quite regularly from businesses since this whole process started. So that's just another point. Regarding the outdoor dining and going back to kind of the way the regulatory mechanisms in order to keep those, as well as to kind of go back. Part of this process was looking at going back to the original way the outdoor dining ordinance was created. We need to kind of think about a new version of that potentially, because the original version, it was very stringent. We're in a place that we need kind of a midpoint stringency on this, because we're still looking at an interim period that we don't know yet how permanent this is. So when we are expecting a business to sign up for certain regulations, they have recently been redirected to the pre-COVID version, and that is something that we should look at. Another one is that bars do most of their business, obviously, at night. And so considering having their use past 10 o'clock, maybe not having music allowed outside, may be something to consider as part of this ordinance, because otherwise restricting that, and depending on how much COVID and the Delta variant, et cetera, happens, that was an issue for the majority of the pandemic, and how much that was regulating their ability to do business by cutting it off at 10 o'clock. So that's something to also consider.
Hey, Robin, I'm gonna cut in for just 1 second. We're at 5:15. Some of us have to leave at 6, and we really need to get to the RFP comments. Given Mike's desire to have this committee kind of put out there the kind of things that they would want council to consider, I think I might propose, I want to just get the feeling from people, this could be the topic of our January meeting. Because again, what I hear is we're gonna have a lot of comments, and we're not gonna get that done in the next 45 minutes. I really need to get that RFP out at the end of the year. So I'm just looking for some thoughts from people. Again, I have Mike and Hillary and Megan all in queue right now, and we can finish those. But I'm almost thinking I'm gonna suggest that we have a full meeting just on this item of like what items council should be at least flagging for staff to look at as they move forward with the ordinance. Thoughts on that by anybody, or thumbs up for anybody?
I think that's great. Can I share just two more things before we move on, just to finish some thoughts?
Go right ahead. I'm gonna go back to Mike, Hillary, and Megan also. So go ahead and finish, Robin.
Thank you. Just two more things is that we really need to consider safety in this interim phase. We have some challenges going on in that right now, and then also regulation, not just policy regulation, but how we navigate safety on the street and how much spaces are being watched, how the spaces and uses are being navigated, because we've had a lot of almost close calls, and we just need to have some more eyes on the street to be able to support that. Obviously, lots to say. Thank you.
Great. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be real quick, and I'll formulate for better for January. But as Councilmember Jordan mentioned, his pet peeves are TVs. Mine is pushing my bike on the 500 block. I think the 500 block's going a little bit out of control. And if we're looking at, potentially at least a year or 2 or 3 years that this will remain in place, I think we need to get the 500 block back open up to bikes getting through.
Hillary.
Mike took the words right out of my mouth, so I'll leave it at that. Plenty to add, but yeah, the fact that it's not one clear shot on a bike is a problem. So appreciate that, and yeah, I think having a meeting on this entirely in January would be helpful, and this has been helpful discussion to think about all of those things. And I agree with Robin about just going back to the same old permitting thing will probably get us back to not having much outdoor dining at all in Santa Barbara. So
Correct.
I agree that that's something to take a look at as well. Thanks.
Great. Megan, are you on the line?
I am, thank you. And I apologize, you guys, you may have covered this. I was picking up my daughter and lost service for a couple minutes there, but I wanted to step back just a little bit from the specifics, and I agree so much with what so many of you have said about the things that need to be considered and looked at as we move towards this non-emergency interim recovery phase. And I'm wondering if in January, potentially before council meets on this, we consider whether, you know, as a group, we want to advocate ourselves for being that sort of decision-making body, or the group that works with staff to implement this ordinance. Because, you know, one of the things that I'm concerned with is we'll have this sort of general feedback, one meeting, and then it's going to be a real challenge to get these things implemented and the experiments done and the different tests run. And what I would love to see is, especially if there's going to be a period while we're waiting for the RFP to come back and for the consultants to get on, I mean, we should be that subcommittee. And you know, I'm just one person. I couldn't speak for the entire council, but I would love for us to discuss as a committee whether that's something we would want to take on, and then potentially see if the full council would like to sort of give us the authority to work with staff as the body that makes decisions to implement interim fixes and to do those kinds of tests. So I just wanted to put that out there as something that I'm really interested in, and maybe that's something that we can consider just as a structural matter when we come back in January. Do we want this committee to play that role as well? Thank you.
I see your hand, Dan. Go ahead.
Yeah, members of the committee, I hear what Megan is saying. I need to advise you that taking on that role would require a change in the nature of the committee a bit. Right now, when you were initially formed, you were a single purpose committee that was to provide a kind of an overarching plan for council. And as such, you weren't what we would call you weren't an FPPC committee. And and that allowed stakeholders who have potentially financial interests in the downtown area to participate as committee members on a regular basis. If we change the nature of the committee and you start being the committee responsible for, as a routine matter, directing policy, the committee will become a committee that's subject to the Political Reform Act, and all of the members will have to disqualify themselves if they have financial interests in the downtown area. So it changes the nature a bit of the committee and its decisions. It's not that it's illegal, it's just we would need to change it. And those of you who have a potential financial interest in decisions as committee members would have to disqualify yourself. And so we'd have to go through that. There are ramifications to taking on those kinds of decisions on a routine basis, that if you're going to recommend it to the council, at least be fully advised of what you're doing.
Yeah, Dan, I really appreciate that. And I certainly recognize that's no simple feat, but I again, just to advocate for us having some decisional capacity during the interim period, you know, one of my fears, and I've seen this with the disbanding of the State Street Subcommittee, you know, do we want to form yet another committee, or do we want to take on that responsibility and have a very clear basis of authority to make interim decisions? I worry if we don't have that, it's going to become a very disjointed process. So again, something for us to discuss in January. Just wanted to throw that out there, and thanks very much.
Let's talk about that in January, because I have my own concerns relative to the bigger process and what we're actually formed to do. Tess gave me a message that essentially they're trying to write their staff report out by the 25th. Tess, just to calm you a little bit, right? Any comments we'd have here would simply be a comments of the council in March. right? Where they're not commenting on the ordinance per se, but items that in fact we might want to be involved with. But we'll have that discussion in January and see where that goes. Let's see. I'm going to close on Alejandra. Just Alejandra, if you have anything else you want to add at this point, because again, I kind of cut you short previously. Good. Okay. Well, so I'm going to table this matter for now. We're going to be looking at bringing that back at our January meeting. And between now and then, go ahead. Somebody's commenting.
Sorry to interrupt, Dave. This is Tess. Just to kind of piggyback off of the comment I sent you. So we are trying to get the ordinance to council by January 25th. And the reason for that is because since it's not an emergency ordinance, we do need 30 days between then and the adoption. So it needs to become, in order for it to become effective when the emergency ordinance ends, the January 25th date is what we're backing out in. So I just throw that out there as we can certainly wait and meet in January to talk about this. It's just that.
I guess my thought is everything we're talking about is how you implement after the ordinance goes into effect. I didn't hear any comments from anybody that the ordinance should be changed in that regard. It's how you implement the ordinance afterwards and essentially the issues that come up afterwards. So I didn't hear anything from anybody that basically said, no, don't adopt the ordinance that's proposed, do something different. So I don't think we have a problem with the 25th. That's my comment.
Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure everybody on the committee was clear on that issue and just the timing component.
That's a good clarification in that regard. Okay. Okay, now I'm going to table this item. Come back in January as our main thing, and you're all going to walk the street in small groups between now and then. So put your antennas out, talk among yourselves as you're walking. Great opportunity basically to prep for that further discussion. It's been a good discussion. Thank you all for opening up. Go ahead. Public comment, I know.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else comments at this point before I go ask for public comment? Okay. Greta, any public comment on this item?
Thank you. If there is a member of the public who would like to speak, please click the hand icon on your control panel once. I'll call on you and you will have 2 minutes to speak. And no one has raised their hand to speak. Thank you.
Great, very good. We'll move then on to the master planning process. Review and comment on the draft RFP, request for solicitation. Tess, nice job on this, by the way. I'll open your comment. Really good job. Go ahead.
Thanks very much, Dave. Okay, so we are now going to be talking about the draft RFP or request for solicitation for the master planning process. And this is attachment C from that staff memo that I sent out. So this will be a pretty broad overview. I'm hoping that everybody's had a chance to review that document. And if you have comments or considerations that you'd like me to incorporate, that we can have that discussion today so that I can finalize it before the end of the year. So just as a quick refresher, this is the process for consultant selection. So really right now we're here, staff's finalizing the RFP, and this is a pretty quick turnaround, but assuming that everything goes according to the timeline, we're going to be looking at it, hopefully getting a consultant on board between May and June of 2022. So just want to make sure everybody is aware of that at this point in time. So now transitioning into the scope of work. So this is just really highlighting some various elements. These are the elements that all of you agreed to have included along with Council and the State Street Subcommittee. And there's some amended items here that your committee has added for the scope of work for the master plan. So these are all of the items that I would anticipate seeing in the final State Street master planning document, the topic areas to be discussed. And just to go into a little bit more detail on some of them, I've outlined them in the RFP draft document. But where we might need some consultant assistance with, for example, in the streetscape design and amenities, we'll want to look and consider design enhancements for downtown streets and sidewalks in order to enhance the pedestrian experience. We're gonna want to look at design elements, the layout and aesthetics. So things like lighting or street treatment. We'll want to look at public spaces and facilities, things like restrooms or public seating or gathering spaces, outdoor dining. We'll want to look at location and structural elements or permitting and licensing for outdoor dining, the analysis of closure locations and the length of the closure, and then an analysis of existing conditions and constraints, and the differentiation of public and private space. So I'm just going to go into that one. Under each of these items in the draft RFP, I've outlined all of the things that I would expect or hope that a consultant could work with me on, and the committee on drafting and ensuring that we have all of that information in the final document. And I've thought that through when they're working on conceptual designs and the implementation plan. So I'm next going to transition over to the deliverables. And these are all of the deliverables that I would expect a consultant to assist with. And this also sort of provides a timeline as well. This is really from start to finish. This is what needs to happen in order for us to have the final State Street Master Plan in our hands and ready to take to a capital improvement project. So I'll go into a little bit more detail here. So I've summarized each deliverable section on these next few slides. I'm just going to start with the project kickoff. These are some of the items that I'm anticipating a consultant to assist with. And then on the right-hand side under research, these are some of the items that I would anticipate a consultant to come in and start looking at. So identifying some of the circulation patterns, existing utilities, what the existing layout and land uses are. Obviously working with staff and getting the correct information to be able to do some of those studies and really analyze what we have out there today. So before I go to the next sections, does anybody have any questions on these two items, project kickoff or research, or do you have anything that you would like changed or incorporated in these two items?
Comments? Okay, Ed and Hillary.
Thank you. I go back to the scope of work and wonder if it isn't too expansive. For instance, we talk about housing. Doesn't the city have some pretty well-defined standards, ordinances, objectives, so on and so forth regarding housing downtown? It's encouraged. It is, it's expected. It's wanted. Do we need to have a consultant look at our current ordinances and general plan regarding housing and tell us more about it? I don't know that we do. The same with homeless engagement. I think the city is working very hard on trying to solve the homeless problem. And the engagement that we would be concerned about is really public safety. And I don't know that the design solutions that we hope to see for the promenade would involve that or should involve that. And I think we should try to narrow down some of this work, not only to save money, but simply to make sure that the focus is on what State Street will look like, how it will function, what are its economic potential, so on and so forth. We know we want more housing. We want more housing to go up, so on and so forth. I just don't know that we should be chasing that or having the urban planner chase that kind of information for us. Thank you.
Yeah, just a comment. Back on page 14, Ed, when you look at homeless engagement and housing, they talk about the consultant would look at existing resources and programs and actually just talk about other opportunities which may be there. So it's not as exhaustive as many in that regard, but really good comment. Hillary.
Yeah, I have less questions. You said questions or comments, so I don't know if we're waiting to public comment or if we're going to this.
Go either way.
Okay, so some of this applies in research and analysis, and some of it's in actually like the background that I had comments about. So And some of it is sort of coming up, so I can cut myself off at some point. First of all, great work. It's always a pain to do an RFP. I feel your pain in this. One thing in just laying this out, right? You know, I'm sure consultants will see this and go, oh yeah, I know Santa Barbara. But, you know, some might not truly. I just noticed in the history, I feel like it goes from sort of, well, one thing. I brought this up at a past meeting, but in a couple places in this, we just referred to Chumash people as history. And so like, if we could really just make an effort to be like, these are people who still exist. This is their land. I actually think a land acknowledgement somewhere in this would be important, that we do live and work and play on Chumash land every day. And then the history sort of goes from the beginning of time and civilization to the earthquake to like a brief mention of the 60s and the 80s and then COVID. And I think there's so much in the 80s and 90s about the transformation of downtown that actually Chair Davis was very heavily involved in, that I think is missing in sort of painting the picture of what we're dealing with here, right? And all the work through redevelopment that happened and all of that. So I think a little bit more background with regards to that would be important. Something else that I think is important to note in all these different components that mention, well, it's both in research and in the actual topic areas in transportation, there's really not a mention of the thing that operated for 30 years to get people around, which is a shuttle system, you know, in the downtown area. And so my concern is if something like that isn't mentioned, there are little mentions of like, you know, transit at the end of a list, but I think something at least background wise, and then also taking a look at what were previous transit circulations patterns around downtown, what are they now, and what could they be in the future? Because I'm worried it'll just get stuck to bike paths and cars, private cars, and then we won't address that. When people have been told this is something they're going to address as part of this, part of why I wanted to be on this committee, right? That we were going to do that. So I'd love for it to be in the scope of work. And then one other thing I'll just add, so I don't have to pop up again, is I feel like there needs to be more parade mention. I know it's sort of towards the end, but when it comes to circulation, and a lot of times I think in the conversations with the emergency routing and what's able to fit on State Street, we can't miss that this is a parade town. Love them or hate them, but that really has to be a component of what we're planning for. So those are my comments. Thanks.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I think I get hit over the head with the parade question more than anything else when I'm out in public, so you betcha. Other questions, comments? Marge, and then Diane.
Thank you, Dave. Tess, really good job on this. It really aligns with the principles that we just adopted. You know, the RFP, and I think, you know, while it seems that we're looking very ambitious and very big, it's important because I think this downtown master planning process really should take in the next 30 to 40 years. What could the future be? And a lot of these land uses downtown may be zoned for something today, and they will be something else after this master planning process. So I like to continue to keep an open mind and be future oriented and be ambitious. And I think that we should encourage the consultants to look at Santa Barbara, look at our historic resources, look at what makes Santa Barbara so viable and so beautiful, and invite them to think bigger. Because that's how Santa Barbara will be sustainable over the long haul. My comments. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Diane.
Thanks. So I guess this is when we're going to give any comments we have, right?
Yep.
I'm gonna start with public outreach, and I thought the public outreach section was really robust, and so I just had a suggestion that we be really clear about what we're trying to achieve, which is that we want to capture everybody's voices. We want to include everybody, and so I think that you could probably provide at least a beginning list of people for the consultant to try and include in our process. And then I hope that we can do some public outreach before we have a consultant on board in June, because I think these next meetings are going to be really foundational for us, and they'll be foundational for the public if we can get people to engage in them at all. So that would be my hope there. And I have a list of groups, but you know, there's no magic to my list. In terms of the subject matter areas, under historic resources, all that's said in the RFP is that we would highlight Santa Barbara's history, but it seems to me it needs to go a step further, and maybe I'm going the opposite direction of Ed, but I think we need to take into consideration our historic resources in terms of the design recommendations and what's feasible and practical while still respecting our resources. On housing, I guess I'm definitely going in the opposite direction of Ed here. I think we need to be a little clearer about what programs are important in the downtown area. I don't think we need to reinvent those programs that the city either has adopted or is in the process of considering for adoption. But you know, the adaptive reuse program should definitely be highlighted here. I think our own housing authority should be highlighted. And I would hope we'd get to a point where, you know, if any city properties are made available for housing, that it would be through a nonprofit or the housing authority, so that we can get some affordable housing downtown. And then my and the league's focus is really to get housing downtown, to reinvigorate it, and to the extent we can get local people who already live here, downtown workers downtown, I think would be really important and should be incorporated into this section. I only have 2 more comments. Actually, maybe only one. This one's a kind of a picky one, but at the end where you say decision maker hearings, you indicate that they should be planning for 4 State Street Advisory Committee meetings. And I'm hoping that that's just in the adoption process, not that they're only going to come to us 4 times. So that's kind of a question. Because four times with the consultant doesn't sound like enough to me.
Yeah, great. Ken?
Yeah, good point.
Just 2 things. One is, I don't know if this fits under research or if it should be in the RFP, but one thing I'm very interested in hearing from these consultants about, you know, we keep talking about how special and unique Santa Barbara is, and most of what we're struggling with, every place else is struggling with too. And also when we're thinking about the future of downtowns, of small cities, I would love for them to bring us some knowledge and thoughts about what they're seeing around the country and what is the discussion about the future of downtowns of small cities. So whether that fits under research or wherever, I would like to see them bring that kind of expertise to us. To me, it's one of the big things that a consultant can bring. And the second thing is that the section I was most drawn to in here is about public engagement strategies. I think it's critical. And my hope is that I don't want to get so specific in what we're asking that we lose the opportunity to hear from them about what have they learned, and what I'm sure, particularly during COVID, there's so many new and creative ideas for how to engage the public. And so I would really like to hear their best ideas, the best things that they've experienced, the best things that they could bring to us around public engagement strategies. Thank you.
Good. Other people? Robin, then Peter.
This is an excellent draft RSP, really quality piece here. The only thing that I see that might be missing is even though that it's very robust in terms of the public meetings, community events, the outreach element, what I'm not seeing in here is specific outreach to the businesses in terms of actually going to them or surveys or things like that. It's often very difficult to get business owners, property owners to meetings because they have a full schedule. And I want to make sure that throughout this process, even though we might have a public meeting or something, we're seeing here that we're not getting as much public comment on this process as we would probably want to. Even though I sent out an email to all of our business owners, we have to often go to them. So I just want to see if we can find a way to make that into this. And then also regarding the ongoing maintenance, ongoing operations and maintenance, safety is one bullet of that, but I would say that it's enough of a situation that we may want to pull that out and then create operations or activations and programming is one, because that's pretty significant difference than maintenance and operations. Just some comments.
Good, good. Peter.
So, Tess, you and I spoke or exchanged emails about under the purpose section about that there's no language of retail. And there's also in the section about what the State Street Aspire, there's nothing in there. It all talks about mixed use community and trying to get a place the community wants to go to. But I think we need to be super intentional that part of our concentration needs to be to make this a vibrant retail shopping experience. And to lose sight of that would be, in my view, a real deficiency. So I didn't see any change in that from the draft, and didn't know if I missed it or not.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I have not made changes. I wanted to make sure we got through this meeting first. And from this meeting, I'm going to take all of the comments that all of you are providing me and then update it with a final version.
Okay, very good, thanks.
Yeah, Peter, I spent 30 years doing retail revitalization downtown. I don't want to lose that effort. Other questions, comments? Okay. Michael Jordan.
So I just kind of have a procedural question, I guess, for Tess. On the selection, the presentation, grading, and selection of the recipient of this this process, are you going to pull some people from this committee and allow them to participate in that?
Yeah, good question. So I just put up the slide again with sort of the overall timeline for the RFP. One of the things that I've discussed with Dave and Ken is to have, both of them essentially help in that interview process where, I want to make sure that we keep moving. And so I think the thought is there are also some elements of just in the interview process, there are things that are confidential from a consultant standpoint. There are things that could be confidential from a city standpoint. And so wanting to make sure that we can kind of move through that process expeditiously with staff.
Perfect.
Really
That's perfect. As long as you're on that, that's all the time. That's my input, is that you need to have people from outside baseball, not inside baseball staff, part of the process as much as you can in who you select for the consultant. That'd be my 2 cents.
Great. Okay. Suzanne. Hey, in fact, I was just going to call you because you haven't said anything all night. I saw you pop up. I go, there she is. Go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I had a question for Tess. This RFP, RFQ, who does this go out to? Who will be the recipients, and who are we hoping to have reply? I mean, who are we hoping to reach?
Yeah, good question, Suzanne. So really it goes out broadly, and I'm going to ask all of you as committee members to also help me make sure that if you've worked with, various groups, some of you have already sent me people that you're interested in. but the idea is that we put it out there as a general solicitation, just like any other RFP from the city. And my hope would be that we have a number of different firms that would want to propose something for this. This is a large project, so I would expect that it would be at least one firm, if not a firm, that's also grabbing in sub-consultants or sub-firms to assist them with the project.
Well, thank you for that. So I was just approaching it from like an architect's point of view, in the sense that, a lot of times communities establish a competition to get interest in a project or to get ideas. And so I wanted to just say that we really want to have innovative thinking, people, firms or applicants that have an innovative thinking, and encourage that. I was just looking at the deliverables. The first item on that are conceptual renderings. So I see this as sort of, what if I were to look at the applicants, I would really want to see their design in terms of what their ideas are. I don't know how to emphasize that. That's my comment.
Thanks, Suzanne. And just to maybe, so if you could, this might help address that comment. I think it's a really good one. On page 8, I did ask that that the consultants, so in the beginning, there's a kind of required proposal content and organization. That's in addition to addressing the scope of work that we've just talked about and those deliverable pieces. But I've asked that that each consultant or each firm provide a conceptual plan or mock-up or a narrative explanation of one block of downtown State Street that identify that, with something that they would change or add to, just to give a flavor for what they might bring to the table. It'd be highly conceptual, and it's just a proposal. But the idea is to try to tease out where they're coming from in terms of their thinking and how innovative those firms might be.
And I think you could add, you're also asking for examples of past work, which will see their past work and we'll talk to their clients, their previous clients. Good question.
Okay, well, thank you.
Good. Okay, I am going to give my comments and wrap this section up. Yes, I agree. The history section, Tess, you and I need to sit down and fill in from 1978 to 2000, because there is a bunch of stuff that happened downtown and why downtown is what it is today, and I'm more than happy to do it. Right. I also agree, and I can't remember who exactly said it, but looking at what's the future of downtown. I really want to stimulate us as to what's the conversation nationally, what's the conversation in California, what's the future of downtowns, what's the economic base today? I know what it was back when I was doing community development, but what's the economic base of downtown going forward, right? It's really changing. And again, really want to see where they're coming from in that regard. And then down in the weeds on page 14, where you have sustainability and resilience, they can highlight environmentalism of project and community. I don't think that's really important. I think what I'd really like to see is opportunities for renewable energy generation and the potential for a downtown microgrid. And then my last comment on public participation, I really want to see the most innovative, robust outreach to the community anybody possibly can. And again, not proscribing it now, but basically letting them come back, tell them, we want the best. We want the best outreach you could possibly deserve or provide. Well, we want to see what they can do. We want them to stretch. Okay. Other comments? Because we're going to wrap this one up right here and jump into the next item. Okay. Thank you all. Really good comments in that regard. Tess, I hope that's helpful for you. Public comment? Greta?
Thank you. Just a reminder, if you wouldn't mind putting up the public comment slide, Tess, when you have a moment. Thank you. If you have a public comment, please click the hand icon once and I'll call on you to speak. You'll have 2 minutes to speak. And we do have one member of the public who has raised their hand. So,
go ahead.
Andrew Newkirk, I'll unmute you and you'll unmute yourself and you'll have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Davis and committee. I wanted to highlight a couple of things. Some of the members have already commented on this, but I think there's a couple places in particular where the engagement and outreach could be kind of clarified to really hammer home that we want a lot of it. So the first point would be in the public meetings and community events. That's on page 12. It lists approximately 2 to 4 annually. I think that should be like 10 plus. Because even at like one touch point, you may need to do like an evening meeting and then the same material on the weekend. So that would, be 50 to 100% of what's scoped for that year right there. So I'd increase that by quite a bit. And then also on the stakeholder meetings, I would list out both early in the process and later on, touching in with other advisory committees. A couple that come to mind are Access Advisory, Transportation and Circulation, and somewhat self-serving. I'm a member of the Downtown Parking Committee. I'm not speaking on behalf of them, but downtown parking for items like the parking and the ongoing maintenance, which has fallen within the purview of downtown parking historically and currently. And kind of with that in mind on the outreach, I think the scope or the timeline at the end is a little fast for kind of the time between the implementation being prepared and the adoption hearings. We're talking kind of 2 quarters to get this done at the end of 2023. And I think even just with the hearings that are listed, that'd be really fast. And I think it would be better to have an implementation plan that's out in the public for review that would come to this committee, come to all those committees or those boards that are being asked to recommend or act on the plan, and give the time for the public to digest it would be really important. And then a revised draft go forward for hearings. I think that's a really important component late in the project for the public to really understand this plan and provide input before the hearings. So those are my comments, and thank you for your time.
Good. No, thank you so much for the comments. Really good ones. We will take those into consideration for sure. Okay. You good with this item, guys?
There are no other raised hands. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Greta. We're good with this? Okay. Item D, potential agenda items for next meeting and future meetings. Tess, you want to talk about possible cancellation of the December meeting and rescheduling of the January meeting?
Sure, a couple of different things I'm hoping to discuss. So we could touch on that first. So we do have a meeting coming up. December 20th is what it's set for. And then the following meeting is set for January 17th. If we do want to cancel the December 20th meeting, I would just suggest that we look for an alternative date in January because the 17th is a city holiday, I believe. So a proposal could be moving it up 1 week to Monday, January 10th, same time. Or we could look at the week after. Since in the next meeting, whether that be December or January, it sounds like the committee would like to really dive into the ordinance and the interim components and pieces there a little bit further. So I would strongly recommend that we look at a date prior to January 17th if you're looking at canceling the December 20th meeting.
Let's just stop and just let's look at the January 10th date. Everybody, if you could look at your calendars, any problem, and again, I'm going to do a yes. Megan?
I can do that date, Dave. I just wanted to put it out there. I know a couple of other committee members have this issue as well. The 4 to 6 time period is not workable for me really moving forward. And so I'm wondering if there's potential for us to send out a new doodle poll. The date is fine, but that block of time is extremely difficult. I know a couple of us have different commitments during this period. So if moving into 2022, if we could maybe do one more try at finding a different 2 hours, I would personally really appreciate it, as would my daughter, who you all saw earlier.
Are you talking either earlier, 2 to 4, or 2:30 to 4:30, or later, 6 to 8, or something like that? Okay. Tess, do you want to do a new doodle poll? See,
I can do that. Yeah.
So I think it just helps to have a schedule. So February, we're gonna have the same issue. If we tried to have our meeting on February 21st, I think that's a city holiday as well. So maybe what we need to do is to look at the calendar year and come up with a meeting schedule for the entire calendar year so we can, you know, if these meetings ever become in person, it's going to be much more difficult, I think, for some of us to attend because we can attend remotely right now.
Yeah, and the other thing is finding a room that works long term if we go back public too. Great comment. Good. Okay, we'll work with Tess on that in terms of getting a doodle back out and relook at those things. Okay, so I'm just gonna look for a thumbs up on canceling the December meeting and moving to January 10th.
Dave, I'm all for canceling in December, but what about doing a social gathering just to toast the State Street and the holiday? Can be a casual thing outdoors.
I can try, if there's interest there, I can try to.
I was waiting to see if people jumped in on that one, Tess.
We have a mixer tomorrow night.
I'm gonna be
We can
honest
all
with you,
come
Roger. Be honest for me, I am socially out in December. I mean, there are so many social things I already have that I probably might skip this one, but I'll leave it to others.
I'd like to nominate Roger as social chairman of the State Street.
Yes. He's the guy who, when I asked for like, what do you like about State Street, with the martinis at Sunset. So yeah, you bet. He's my man.
December is awfully busy. But
Feeling
New
so
Year.
for tomorrow evening, there is a downtown networking mixer that you can all come to at Locals Collective, and that would be
There
a
you
great
go.
way for us to all connect.
There you go. Thank you, Robin.
5:37.
There you go. I love it. Okay, I'm going to basically say we are going to cancel December 20th. We're looking at January 10th, and Tess will do a new doodle as to time and then a calendar, as Diane talked about, going forward. Sound good?
I just had one question. Does that mean we only have one meeting in January? We're not keeping the old meeting and adding one? Is that correct?
Oh, that's correct. Just that meeting on the 10th. We're moving it up.
Just one meeting, okay.
Yeah, correct. Okay, and Tess, I'm also just gonna comment to Tess on the learning opportunities. Let's talk about that at the end of the 10th meeting, because again, coming out of the 10th, we may be in a whole nother role doing different things going forward in the months coming forward. So let's hold that one for now, and then we'll see where we go. Roxana?
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a general question, and again, I don't expect an answer right now, but I wanted to plant this as a follow-up. In the new year, a lot of our schedules change, and I was wondering if Tess or whoever else might be involved might be able to put out a new survey to see if Mondays at this time still work for everyone. Would that be something that would be considered at the change of the new year?
I think that's what we're
I'll
asking.
put out, yeah.
I think
I'll
that's
put
what
out-
we're asking Tess to do that. We've already asked Tess to do it. Exactly that.
Got it. I wasn't clear. I apologize if I'm duplicating a question.
Hey, never hurts.
Thanks.
Okay.
And Dave, just perhaps if I could just jump back on the learning opportunities, I'm fine with waiting until January. I would just stress, I do think that having the transportation circulation kind of emergency access nuts and bolts of State Street is going to be really important for this committee and kind of provide a foundational element there, that as we're starting to talk about some of the things, even like today, as we talked, there were conversations about the 400 block. I've spoken with Public Works and they're ready to do a workshop type meeting on all of that. So I would encourage us to be thinking that that's going to be one of the first ones.
I no problem. My thing is, I think we may start having more than one meeting a month in some form or fashion, because there's just too much work. If we're going to do the interim stuff as well as the long-term stuff and the learning opportunities, January, we're going to be talking about what's our program look like going forward. But we're going to come back to transportation circulation right at the top, as we've talked for sure. Okay, I'm taking one last comment from Hillary, and then I'm at 6 o'clock. I gotta go.
Thanks. Yeah, when we were talking about future, or saw on the agenda, we're going to talk about future agendas and all that. I do think that specifically, like, what are the current operations and maintenance set up now is important for us to get sort of kind of that existing conditions understanding. And then public safety and emergency access, those are like basic things. And I do think, again, that transportation circulation, if we get through that in one meeting, it'll be a miracle. But, all the different things that I know the public will want to engage on, making sure that we give enough time for those. But I think, the current operations and the public safety of like, what are the non-negotiables is important to do next.
Great, good. Okay, folks, it's 6:01. I have to check out for one. Thank you all for the meeting tonight. I've got somebody doing a message here. Public comment, okay? How about public comment?
Thank you. Reminder, if you have a public comment, please use the raise hand function in your control panel, and I'll call on you. You'll have 2 minutes to speak. And no one has raised their hand. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Okay, everybody, thanks for the good meeting tonight. Lots of input, lots of things to work on. Enjoy the fog in the morning. It's going to be totally different, right? Good night, everybody.
Thanks,
everybody.
Gabe, thanks all.